Welcome to the XExamine podcast. Another interesting exploration into all the things that are happening in today's world. It's just been an absolutely crazy week, and it's actually quite ironic, I would say, that it is April 1st. And I wish that some of these things were a joke. I wish that it weren't so, because so many things are happening. We got the Restrict Act, a bill in the U.S. Senate. Some people are calling it the TikTok ban bill, but it's so much worse than that because if it were just about banning TikTok, that would just be the name of it. They would just call it ban TikTok, but it's about civil fines up to $250,000, criminal fines up to $1 million, or 20 years in prison if you are deemed to have visited a website that the U.S. Secretary of Commerce says you can't visit. We got Trump being indicted by the grand jury. We have banks collapsing. We have a shooter of a Christian school who identified allegedly as trans. Then we had the momentum behind that, where people were calling for even more violence by trans people to engage in violent activities. This is just in 7 days. I'm feeling overwhelmed by the amount of insanity that this world is experiencing right now.
I agree. In some ways, it almost feels like Revelations. I mean, we had Andrew Tate released yesterday, and like with the second coming of Christ, it seems like
This
we're
time with
uh
his
we're
brother.
in, we're in for a doozy. Yeah, I'm just waiting for the seven-headed crown dragon to appear.
Jeez,
Um,
oh man.
no, you're absolutely right. This week has been absolutely wild. It is almost too much to comprehend. I'm sitting here on April Fool's Day feeling like the fool himself, just because so overwhelmed by the lack of good quality information we have on things, and B, the sheer amount of stuff that is happening all over the place. I think, and most importantly, I think you did actually a really great job of ordering all of the different things. I think in order of importance, quite honestly, because I would say that this Restrict Act is incredibly important, and a lot of people are not going to pay attention to it because they only associate it with TikTok. So I'm glad that you brought that up right away.
Part of that is probably just the information overload that we have. There's simply too much noise that no one has time, and yet they're tasked with absorbing the incredible exponential production of data, and we're supposed to digest it, analyze it, and have an opinion on it that's informed. And there's just simply too much occurring in today's world because in addition to all these things that are happening, we also have our own individual lives. Some of us have families. Maybe people are in school, they go to work. We live extremely busy lives. So it's just
We
so
do,
strange.
we
Oh, and,
do, and
and go ahead.
oh, I was going to say that, as I've often been told, productivity is the enemy of creativity. It's seems
Oh,
like we're just inundated with all of this news, busy work, information, things too that are spun in quite a way that they seem like an existential threat to us. You go on Twitter for any amount of time and people are posting things about like twisters happening and floods, and it's constant sort of um, stimulus in a way that makes your adrenaline run. So it's, I think, like a really crazy time where we almost have to view the scrolling activity on these social platforms as task switching every time that we go from like one bit of news to the next. And I think it's quite honestly exhausting. I think we go on social media to relax, and somehow it does the opposite.
wow. I remember watching some news article, maybe pushing 2 weeks now, about the tornado. And that just goes to show how busy this lifestyle is that I don't actually know how long ago it was, but it was an interview with somebody who they had a restaurant. Tornado alarms go off. It's upon them before they know it. And they all go into the freezer fridge of their restaurant. It's like 9 or 12 people, some workers, some patrons, I believe. And then the tornado destroys the entire area. rips the roof off the restaurant, destroys all the walls, and literally it's just the fridge freezer that's standing. It was the only structure that withstood the tornado. And uh, so when these people come out, they've lost everything. Everything around them is destroyed. The amount of setback that poses for them for their lives. I mean, cars are destroyed, and they're still like the world goes on. Like all of these things, they will still be expected to have an opinion on all the recent events that happened this past week, but they have to also rebuild their own lives. So it's just this crushing pressure that they're on like the rack, or they're the old school torture thing, and they're getting stretched out and they can only withstand so much, but they're expected to be present for all of it and in the game, engaged.
Yeah,
So we're
absolutely. It seems like that, not only will they have to, they will naturally adapt and toughen up. I definitely believe that. And I think we all have to probably do the same. I mean, I think it's incredibly important that we take the personal responsibility to reflect on everything that's going on and start making those difficult changes. I know for myself, it'll probably be, even though, like, when starting a podcast and trying to get your voice out there, you have to necessarily engage in an amount of social media, and it's its own like type of work, so it's interesting that it's like you're trying to do this because we're trying to supplement normal income by attempting to do these things, and at the same time also trying to interact with a greater population of people. That's just kind of the nature of doing a podcast to begin with. And I think it's interesting that even in myself, I'm finding the like there are trade-offs to be had where I'm like slightly more miserable because of how much social media I have to engage with. Yeah, at the same time, like there's no running away from it. This is my life, and I can't run away from politics, which is why reflecting on it, the Restrict Act that we mentioned in the very beginning is just so important because, as you mentioned, it's not just about TikTok. It's opening up federal government to a slew of new powers
some
to exercise on the American people.
I believe some people are calling it like the Patriot Act 2.0, which just gives broad sweeping, nebulous, and nearly limitless power over you in the name of national security. And what I didn't mention in the very beginning is that this can be used as well. It's pointed out by Matthew Cratter, who has a YouTube channel called Trader University. So credit to him for this part of the analysis. And it can be used to punish people who choose to use a VPN. And if you're not familiar with what a VPN is, it's a kind of like a tunnel or a channel that blocks the internet service provider like AT&T or whoever your internet provider is from seeing your internet traffic. And so this is an interesting philosophy to explore and cross-examine because this is going to attack the statement that, oh, if you're innocent, you should have nothing to hide. And it goes against the right to privacy, the right to transact with cash off the record, that I am innocent until proven guilty, not the other way around. And you don't just have free reign to search my house, inspect my vehicle, go through my computer, my phone, just because you think you have that right. Then there's no reasonable suspicion, there's no probable cause, there's no reason to believe that there is any wrongdoing, that nothing bad has occurred, that nothing is being planned. But it's just increasingly we find ourselves under this microscope being scrutinized and being less and less free. So a lot of companies also force employees to use their VPNs to protect their trade secrets, to protect corporate information, or healthcare agencies that have PII, personally identifiable information, or medically protected information. I'm sure that militaries use VPNs. But what will be interesting is a lot of this is like if you're not allowed to use a VPN, but I and the government can, this is a I need you to lay down your gun, but I'm going to hold mine in my hand pointed at you. Which is
Yeah,
like a I want everybody else to disarm themselves, but I'm not going to be participating in this relinquishment.
Yeah,
And we just
it
it's a weird way to strip yourself of protections, and it just sets you up as a very vulnerable person.
yeah, absolutely. Which unfortunately is the intent of all these things. Like it wasn't accidentally written in a way that would be like, oh, I didn't realize that I was just removing the rights of Americans and all of these different ways. It's intentionally done, and I think people need to start realizing that it's that your politicians are actively engaging in trying to remove rights that you have and making it much more easy for warrantless searches and activity to begin. And I think that's so perverse. I mean, if you have any sort of love for the amount of freedom that we enjoy in this country, they cannot include a future of drones being flown over people's property. Like, I don't know if you saw this story or not, but to tell the audience that they might have, there are certain counties in Ohio which officers, and I'm sure this is in other states as well. It was just like this news article is particularly well, I'm sorry, it wasn't a news article. It was a statement released by one of the, um, I don't know if it was like the county sheriff or something like that, but people were throwing beer bottles at these drones
Hmm.
that were flying over their yard, and like the police like sent out this statement that was like, please stop throwing beer bottles at our drones, and it's like, well, one, like, do they know that it's from the police? It's a drone. It's a pretty small thing. Like, do they have lights on it? Like, what's going on there? And two, like, how could you have a drone flown over someone's property and that's not like it feels like you need a warrant for that. Like, I'm not a legal expert, but that really feels like you need a warrant for that.
That's very shocking and disturbing. I have seen a few videos about drones flying over private properties. One of the guys I watch on YouTube, Steve Lato, he's a lawyer and has addressed this a few times. It's definitely an area for debate because airspace you don't need a warrant to be in, but we're in new territory because we've never encountered mini portable helicopters with controllable cameras. And so the incidence of flying a helicopter over somebody's property was just so rare that that added in as a variable to this equation. But now they can just fly over your property and essentially indefinitely you can hear that, and I could just have a drone flying over your property for continual surveillance, which does seem like the situation has now changed. And I think that there's a certain height that you are allowed to be at, but it's definitely something that should be talked about because there's a difference between having an airplane just fly over someone's property and you look out the window and what you can see from that is not like super detailed. But if I have this drone that's flying and hovering 30 feet above your property and moving around, getting different angles, you could probably, even if they have a privacy fence, look in through their bedroom window, look in through their kitchen window, see all the items around their garage or their shed, see what kind of plants they're growing. Uh, if they're out on their pool, they think they're getting a tan with minimal clothing. Well, are you going to feel like you have your right to privacy, even with your privacy fence, when there's a drone that's 30 feet above your property and the police are telling you that you can't do anything about it? That does seem like a massive invasion of privacy that they should get a warrant for. We're entering a very strange era where technology allows people to just intrude on our lives. Like if you're not allowed to use a VPN and people just are able to inspect everything that you're doing. This is actually almost reminding me of a revisitation a few years ago. I think it was called like the Encrypt Act. And under the guise of protecting children, they tried to make all encryption illegal, or that the government would have a backdoor cipher key to unlock all forms of encryption. And that if that bill had passed, it would have been illegal and punishable as a criminal offense to have any file that was encrypted because the government needs access to it to protect victims of sexual crimes,
That's
even
wild
if
because like
there's
wouldn't that even affect like the financial system?
uh there's always groups that will carve out exceptions for themselves. I have no doubt of that. So there are probably groups of people that are somehow excluded.
Very well said. I mean, everything that you said there is so spot on. It feels like we are on that slippery slope, and there's just been this deliberate effort to every time. And here's the game that people need to realize it's just quite explicitly the government will try to pass all of these things and they will say just very clearly that this is for the safety of you. And unless you're the one who's looking, and reading in between the lines and making sure that everything is copacetic with what they're saying, it's more or less a ruse to just expand their powers.
Yep,
And
there's
remember, they
another.
have an incentive to do so. And that's another thing too. It's like they don't give a shit about being accountable to the people. They care about their own money. They're all becoming massively rich playing to these giant corporations who are in on this game. Giant corporations are very interested in government regulations because that allows them to stave off competition. Because in order to be within regulatory compliance, you need to have all these other systems set up. So that's a massive upfront cost to a lot of these industries. So it's really hard for someone to just open a bank. It's really hard for someone to open all sorts of different businesses. So they've made the entry into this competition so limited, and then the people who are skimming off the top are the politicians because they're the ones facilitating and making this stuff happen. People need to realize that there it has been so researched too. Like there's this whole literature on regulatory capture in economics. Like people have won the Nobel Prize in economics for regulatory capture. It's such a well-known phenomenon at this time where you have people who are in business and they're in politics and they hopscotch from one end to the other. You should see how many of these people, like a great example is the Silicon Valley Bank. You have at the very top of SVB, the CEO was heavily involved with the government. He knew all those sorts of regulations. He hung out with those guys. He was a part of that group for a long period of time. Um, and then what Silvergate Bank, I believe it was, is what was his name? The guy who there's a famous act named after him, and my rage has made me blinded to the name again.
I'm not
Was
sure.
Let me look it up real quick. Oh, it was from the Dodd-Frank Act.
Okay, okay.
That's it. And his name is because I always remember his first name. Okay, so it was Barney Frank of the Dodd Frank Act, and I'm sorry, it wasn't Silvergate, it was Signature Bank. Um, so you have people who are famously like they have legislation named after them and were heavily involved in politics, being, of course they're going to be successful inside the what we call the private economy, but really it's all public if you think about it. It's very little that we actually have. We have it's like you have a toddler inside daycare. It's just like, yeah, you can go play with the Legos, you can go play in the sand pit, or you can go play in the, toy box, but like you're still very close, like fenced in
Hmm.
easily. And you can say that sort of regulation is necessary, and yet all we see is constant abuse of these systems. So you have to really ask yourself which ones of these regulations are necessary and which ones are not. Something like the Restrict Act, which just it just increases the powers of the enforcement branch of our government, does not seem to be a very useful tool, nor do I think it's going to make me more safe.
There's an interesting part of that too. You said that you might not feel safer, but it's often under the guise of safety that these sweeping powers are given to themselves because they say that they now have that power. And one of the things that is encompassed in this Restrict Act is getting access to your Ring cameras. So if people aren't familiar with that, there's like, I don't know, probably over 1 million of them at least across the US where people just have a little Ring doorbell camera. So you can see who's on your porch, who's knocking on your door. You can like remotely talk to them. And it's a good safety feature until you realize that with great power comes great responsibility. And that doesn't apply to the government, where there's also a civil rights lawyer. He's got a YouTube channel. I don't remember his actual name, but he had covered a case where there was something happening in the area and the police asked him for some footage. He gave them a little bit, but they wanted more. And then they ended up uh, getting a warrant, freezing this guy's account. He's not part of it at all. It's just that he had Ring cameras on his property that had possibly a vantage point of what did occur. Then Ring, the company, which I think somehow is owned by Amazon or is a business partner with Amazon, which that's a whole other thing because they have AWS, Amazon Web Servers, which also house most of the Pentagon's data on private servers. And so the Pentagon doesn't let you do that unless you are essentially the same organization or very tightly close knit with defense agencies and the inner workings of our three-letter agencies. But so this guy, he also had cameras inside his home, including in his bedroom. And the company gave up all this information, said that we're going to comply with this warrant and you can't do anything about it, essentially. And I should say allegedly. So he had these cameras, and now police have possession of all the footage of inside and outside of his home. And they said that they didn't take all of it, and yet there's a lot of conflicting information. And this is just a local law enforcement agency. So if you can imagine that everybody who has these cameras, this is a camera into America, and you better believe that we have every right to suspect that the federal government has a way that it's to their advantage to access these live feeds all over America for no reason or any reason they want. Because if you're innocent, you should have nothing to hide, right? It's for your safety.
Yeah, I mean, so much to unpack there. I think, were you referring to Steve Leto, by the way?
He was one of the attorneys, but there's another attorney who I think his channel is literally called the Civil Rights Lawyer or the Civil Rights Attorney.
Okay, I gotcha.
He's the
Yeah, there's a
yeah,
few of those that I watch. Like I watch like Legal Eagle every once in a while too. He's got some pretty interesting stuff. But besides those personalities aside, no, I like the whole enterprise that's being engaged in with increasing enforcement powers should really give like an eyebrow raise to the American people. It's like really like how much safety. One, really ask yourself how much safety do you feel already? How many things do like are we talking about preventative justice here? Are we talking about like just a post mortem on whatever sort of activity should have occurred before? I have no problem with people willingly giving up camera information in order to help an investigation. I do think it is perfectly okay though for people to refuse. And so we're kind of in this area where the police officers just don't like to be told no. And that is upsetting to me for sure.
and that's again, that's on the lowest level of law enforcement where they still have to play by the rules.
Mhm.
So if you have overwhelming, sweeping national jurisdiction, and you can basically do anything under the guise of national security. So, I mean, if you can get a secret FISA warrant, if you can monitor someone's VPN activity, and then even if they're a no log company, and then tell them that they have a gag order and they can't tell the people that they're monitoring and logging their activity if they ask, we're already in it so deep. It's just remarkable.
Yeah.
And
So the
this attorney's name is John H. Bryan, and his channel is the Civil Rights Lawyer, just
okay,
for
cool, very nice.
completeness.
Thank you for that. So getting back to like what are we as American citizens supposed to do about this? And I think one is that we do need to become politically more active, and I think we need to be demanding more on the transparency side. I will sing this to death because in my normal everyday career profession, I am engaged in auditing related activities. And I really do believe there's something to auditing, the search for um, consistency and accuracy to be, one of the main goals that we should be striving for as a society, especially as things become more and more covert. So I think as citizenry, we should really be demanding, and I think one of the easiest things to demand is financial records. And I think we should be demanding financial records left and right on everything. And I mean, like, we have to make those small wins so we can make the bigger wins happen. If you're trying to go after the Pentagon fails audits all the time. Like, there's really nothing you can do at that highest level unless, as they like to say inside our industry all the time, compliance is a culture. We should be demanding the sort of compliance at the lowest level first. Those are going to be the easier wins. And then once people get used to that level of transparency, I think it'll be easier to move up the ladder. But it has to be a grassroots movement. So we have to be looking at our local, school systems. We have to be looking at our local governments. We have to be really pressing them. If they didn't do anything wrong, they should have nothing to hide, right?
I think for public institutions, that is the case because they are supposed to be subservient to the citizenry, and they're not really individuals in that sense. They're public servants. So in the same way that you can film police officers as long as you're not directly interfering with their work, you should also be able to inspect the books of your local city hall, um, because that is your taxpayer funded dollars at work, and you are a constituent. All that is there to assist society and yourselves. There's really no reason, there's no justifiable reason to prevent you from reading those books all day long if you wanted to. There's even like a lot of weird restrictions where somehow like, well, we can let you see our books, but we can only let you see them for 10 minutes. It's like, why is this restriction placed on that? There only seems to be one reason, and that's to separate you and cut you out of the process. That don't you worry your pretty little brain about this. Just keep paying your taxes and leave all the thinking and authority to us.
Yep. Yep, absolutely. As we increase your taxes, as we reduce your rights, as it's funny because like if the government was a business, we would have all left already. And that's because no business can survive by decreasing value over time and increasing their prices for a worse product. So it's
Unless you
insane.
have forced participation.
That's true. It has to be at gunpoint. It has to be, or at least some sort of like undesirable consequence. That's using gunpoint as a metaphor more or less. But otherwise, people will just continue to be sheep in this economy, and then they'll be led to slaughter eventually when they realize, oh, what happened to my 401k? What happened to my pension? It's like, well, you weren't vigilant enough. You just decided to trust endlessly, and it's on you to check up on all of your own systems at
Wow,
play. You know,
that's a really good take home point is eternal vigilance is the price of freedom. This is not just trust, but verify. Don't just believe that things are going to be okay. And hope is not a strategy.
that's true because otherwise, the only thing we'll be able to give you is thoughts and prayers.